Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
Well, you've heard him before, J. Barry Lewis. He's very famous. He's director of Palm Beach Dramaworks productions, most of them. And the one we're talking about now is Sam Shepard's Buried Child. Now, don't get worried about that. We're going to hear all about it. It's a very strange title, but we don't want to tell you too much because we want you to see the show. But thank you very much, Barry, for taking time. I know you're in the middle now. You always start planning on doing other things way ahead of time.
Indeed. Well, good to speak with you, Anita, and then all of your followers there in the radio land. Thank you for having us on. And yes, you know, part of being in theater is that you're always planning ahead and trying to stay ahead as far as you can. I'm currently just in preparations, having just opened Buried Child, but also in preparations now for our next show, which we'll love to talk about in the future, is a Billie Holiday story, a lady based upon Lady Day at Emerson Bar and Grill. So that's quite fascinating.
Yeah, Billie Holiday. That's another thing I just heard. An NPR show with Billie.
Yes, we just celebrated her 100th birthday, actually, this last Tuesday.
Yeah, and great voice, but unfortunately she didn't live very. I mean, how long did she live? We'll talk.
Well, she died in the 50s, in about 1959, and she was born in 1950. She only had a life. She only lived about 40, not quite 40 some odd years. Yeah, very, very brief, as many of those fine artists do.
Yep, just get caught up in other stuff. But we're here. I really want to talk though about Buried Child.
Gladly.
Even the ad shows, you know, the little skeleton on the shovel. Tell us about what we're going to see when we go there.
Well, you know, that's a good point to start, Anita, is that ad that you see. You know, when you see a title that says Buried Child and that you see that the image is a shovel and the skull of a very small baby, you know that somewhere in that play and somewhere in the performance, you're going to learn about this buried child. No, you don't know whether it's the gist of the entire story or if it's a metaphor for the life, but that's going to be part of the performance. This particular piece, written in 1978-79, I think you may know, won the Pulitzer Prize that year for the playwright Sam Shepard, and is a story of a family, a dysfunctional family from living in the cornfields of Illinois, and Illinois has become one of the great American family plays, I should say, that exists as far back as the Arthur Miller stories of All My Sons, The Death of a Salesman, and to Edward Albee's Delicate Balance. Great plays dealing with the family structure, and Sam Shepard turned his hand and his talent toward his understanding of the American family in this play, and then a series of other plays which were to follow. Buried Child is the first of a series of 5 plays that he wrote in the late 70s and the 80s that deal specifically with family, and it's called, you know, his Family Quintet series. And this is the first of the Sam Shepard plays that we've ever produced at Palm Beach Dramaworks, and are very pleased to bring it to our audiences.
How many actors?
Well, there is a cast of 7. We have a family of a husband and wife, 2 of their sons, 2 sons. A third son has previously passed away, and into that mix walks a grandson and his girlfriend. So it's 7 individuals, and a fine cast it is, I should say.
This has nothing to do with it. It just hit me. Tell me, when we used to say actors and actresses and now we call them all actors, what happened?
What happened to that? Well, interesting. You know, when we think of chairman, chairlady, or chairperson, we try to create an equal playing field, I think, in which everyone is not defined by a particular sexist point of view, per se, I think. And so I think the universal actor is both male and female in today's market.
Right, because I just said it, and I said, gee, I'm going to have to ask. I don't often think. I'm so glad you were there. You're so smart. All right, and the other thing I want to know is, what does it take to actually win the Pulitzer Prize?
Boy, that's a great question, and I think there would be a lot of individuals who would have different perspectives on that. You know, the Pulitzer Prize, when it was first instituted, was to really try to find that work in the theater. Of course, that is the outstanding work, but it has been full of controversy over the years. Works like Glengarry Glen Ross, which is David Mamet, and there have been years that, for instance, the one that we were just talking about, Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is undoubtedly a brilliant work of theater, was passed over by the Pulitzer Committee because they thought it was too profane at the time. And so there have been years in which the prize has simply not been given, and then there are other years in which it's been given and it's been very questionable about the work. And so there is a committee, and this committee, there are nominations to this committee, and the committee spends a great deal of time in looking at and listening and reading and talking about that which is exemplative in these works, and then they try to, bring forward that which is the best. There have been a lot of questions about that. A case in point was, you probably remember Horton Foote, the great film writer who wrote the screenplay for To Kill a Mockingbird, and then he Trip to Bountiful. Well, he was also a playwright for the stage, and he was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for a piece of theater called The Young Men from Atlanta that was obviously not his best work. But I think the committee was giving him the Pulitzer Prize based upon a body of work that he had brought to it. So there's a lot of controversy around what makes a Pulitzer Prize.
Did The Death of a Salesman ever win a Pulitzer Prize?
Death of a Salesman, I am not certain. I'd have to go back and read, but it does not ring a bell right away.
The reason I say that, because of the things that you've been talking about, Barry, is even though something's sad and it's worrisome, oftentimes, and you're going to laugh at this, when I come back home and I've maybe visited 3 potential advertisers and I didn't get it, I think of The Death of the Salesman. I am exhausted.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. We look... Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And even all my sons, many times we have to, even though when something is very tragic, we as humans often have to find that which is, and gives us the ability to laugh at the situation and therefore at ourselves, to be able to endure the tragedy at times. And that is exactly what happens in Buried Child. Some horrific events that I won't share with you, but certainly I hope your audience members will go and see the show. But there are things that occur that are seen unbelievably tragic and sad, and yet we're able to not laugh at them, but we are able to understand that through humor, we are able to grasp them, the very nature of them sometimes.
And maybe it's comfort. It's comfort to know that you're not the only one.
Yes, and sometimes when things are so difficult, there is comfort in understanding how that I can simply, we often talk about wrapping our heads or our minds around things that seem to be so tragic. And the only way to truly do that is to shed light on it, and sometimes in a very humorous way. And that's what Shepard does, I think, so brilliantly. He proceeds through events that are horrific, but at the same time he'll turn it on its head, or just turn it on its ear, I think is the statement. And something will become very funny very quickly, and then it'll turn again to become very serious. But that's what makes good theater, I think, is that ability to work both sides of the coin as we're looking at problems.
We're listening to J. Barry Lewis, who's director of Palm Beach Dramaworks production of Sam Shepard's Buried Child. By the way, Shepard is spelled Shepard. It's just one P. And we've talked with Barry Lewis before. The Palm Beach Dramaworks is probably the finest theater we have here in South Florida. If you've not been there, it's just downtown on Clematis Street. And the plays they perform, the actors, it's real theater. So even though we have a lot of theaters, we have a lot of theaters, and it's fun, and we go and we see. But I'm never disappointed when I go to see what they do there. They work very hard. But it's showing that they are being recognized because they're being well funded. They have great sponsors, and I'm always so pleased to be involved with them. But what I wanted to also say is the way to get to see what they're doing, whether it's you get to this show, which I hope you do, or the future shows, is go to palmbeachdramaworks.org, palmbeachdramaworks.org. Now, you can call the box office to get tickets, and I have to tell you that they're almost sold out all the time. So if you really want to see something, get on the phone, make sure that you get your name in there and go to the box office. And you can always be a subscriber, but you just want to call them. The number there is 561-514-4042. That's 561-514-4042, and buy your tickets. And remember, this is Pencil Talk Radio, so we're always giving you phone numbers and websites, and just write it down so you have it and you don't have to worry later. All right, well, let's just go through. There's one word, too, I haven't seen before. You call it a tragicomic. Is that something you invented?
No, that term has actually been around for a while, but it speaks to what we were just talking about, a tragedy and comedy, as they are sort of pushed up against each other very tightly. And we call it a tragicomedy. And, even Shakespeare was known for writing the kind of work that was both humorous and tragic at the same time. So it's a very old theatrical device.
That's a hard thing to do, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But you're always looking to the text and trying to determine what is it that the playwright is truly focusing in on, and what is the playwright trying to say. And sometimes he'll give you a very absurdist perspective on that moment. And when you look at it on the face value of it, it will seem funny. And then as you think about it, it begins to turn into something else. That is talent that takes that. And our job as director and then the actors in the company is to try to move through that minefield and help get clarity on that so that the audience can clearly then see what the playwright is intending.
Yes, and we never do this, but I just had to take my hat off to Sue Ellen Barrow and to Bill Hayes, because if it weren't for them, it wouldn't have happened, right?
Yes, that's very true. They are two of the founders. The third founder is Monique Veridian, who is a very fine artist in her own right, who got together 15 years ago now, Anita. It's hard to believe, but they started working about putting together a company that would look at the great American works, as well as British at times, but of the last century, and exploring those texts and those plays that have not been seen in our community in many years. And that includes the works of, say, Miller and Albee and in today's Shepard. And, the tagline of the theater, as you well know, is theater to think about. And I think that Shepard and our production of Buried Child really does underscore that sort of theme that we have as what the theater is known for. When you leave the theater, we hope that you're entertained. We know you'll be entertained, but we also, perchance, give you something to chew on a little bit after you left the theater.
Right, and something that I was always amazed at, the first theater down in West Palm where they had their, performances, they only seated about 99 people, and it was
That's correct. It wasn't even 99, it was 90 seats. It was smaller than that. It's
so up close you could touch the actors, but it was...
Well, that was very important when Bill, Sue Ellen, and Monique were looking at what the next theater was going to be like. It's, where we presently are is only 10 rows deep, and it has still a sense of intimacy, and it's still very important to the audiences when we were on Banyan Street.
Mm-hmm.
So
it was. Right, but you needed to have a larger place because it just couldn't, it was always sold out and people wanted more and more. But Aaron, I just want to ask you a question. When you say the heartland of America, where actually, is there an actual state or just generic? We're having a problem with your cell phone.
Well, sorry.
Go ahead.
Now?
Okay, so fine.
There we go.
Yeah.
It's a pretty generic comment and a pretty generic statement. He writes in a period that is the late 70s and the 80s, and we set it in that period because it had to do with the morals and the time and the different issues that were happening at that time. But Shepard has a universal point in his work that bridges time, I feel.
Yeah. And of course, we always think the Midwest, it's that they're different than we are in the East Coast, the West Coast, because maybe that's where the tradition is and where the families are, and they're still there.
Well, that's a good point, because, we think of the heartland as the rock on which, the farm and the family emerged from, and it was the bedrock on which this country truly sort of depended upon. And here we have families who are a part of those communities that appear or were at one time as strong as the bedrock was. But what happens to those families when an event that occurs or a tragedy takes place that forever changes then their lives? And that's their child.
Yeah, but humans are humans, no matter where they live or where they come from, and that's, people don't really understand that. So, well, that's something that Sam does very well. He does.
Yes, he does. I think that he explores that in his knowledge. Yes, he does. He is from a family that originally was from Illinois. His father and mother. His father was in the Air Force in the war years flew over Italy, and however, when he came back from the service, they moved to California and several other places. And people often say, and have asked him if the characters that he writes in his family plays, including Barry Child, are his family. And he says, not my family as much as they are about issues of family. Not so much that they are carbon copies as that there were things that took place in his early life that emerge in his writing. Sam talks about being an adult, that it says, before we can move forward in our lives, we have to understand where we come from. Now, that includes a family from the Midwest or from the East or from wherever it is, but that's a very universal thought, is it not?
It is. Now, you mentioned that because I know that I grew up in Miami Beach, and a lot of that does play into things that I think about. Or
certainly. I'm from Kentucky originally.
So I'm sure that's the same way, because Kentucky, as they say, ain't what it was before.
Absolutely. I grew up down the street, believe it or not, from the very first restaurant of Colonel Sanders.
No way.
Fried chicken. Now, that's a little bit of history there.
Well, you don't know this, but I had Kentucky Fried Chicken, Colonel Sanders' daughter, who is now in her 90s, on my television show, and she did a whole story about that and how she, of course, was preserving the secret of the recipe, the 7 things that went into that. But she was a delightful woman. Right, the spices. But, that is a funny story. So that's where you come from, right? Well, let's talk a little bit about you. So when did you know you wanted to get into the arts like this?
Well, that's, now that I have had a wonderful, career and all of these great opportunities and to look back on it, I think that when I was growing up in the 1950s and the 1960s, my father is a minister and worked within the church structure. And I've often said that going to church on Sundays and throughout the week, watching and participating in church services was always very dramatic and then somewhat theatrical. Music and readings and the sense of ideals that were being presented. And so it seemed that was not to be my calling or to be my line of work, but it seemed to impact a need or clarity for me to see it in another aspect, the extension. And theater seemed to be perfect for that, from that angle. So I pursued that. My parents were not in the theater, nor did we go to see a lot of theater, but theater was there, and I was just fascinated by the storytelling nature, the narrative of theater, and was particularly live theater, not so much film on television, but live theater, because of the shared experience that you have between that which is on stage and in the audience. Just you have, like in any church or synagogue service, you have the leaders and then you have the participants, and it's always about that interaction that takes place and the power of those moments. And I think theater does that as well.
Well, Barry, that's beautifully said and explained. I would never think of something like that. But did you ever explain this to your parents? Are they still alive?
Oh, many times, because they still scratch their head.
Oh, right. I was going to ask you that next.
And I have a younger brother who is also in theater, although he's more in film. His name is Peter Lewis, and he works out of Los Angeles in film. And so they have two sons who followed their passion and their dreams with the art.
And you told your dad that he was responsible for this, right? And he says, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, don't blame it on me. He's often said that.
Yeah, I can see that, but because that's what I was going to ask you, how this all came about. But when you think about it, I guess I really don't go to church or synagogue. I mean, but I have been enough times to see the ceremony and what does happen.
Yes.
And it's, of course, beforehand, even what happened before that. I'm sure you sat there where your father was trying to figure out the speech he was going to make for that particular day.
Absolutely. Well, theater has in ancient times, even to the Greeks, was a platform on which ideals were presented, sometimes humorously, sometimes satirically. And so there's a similarity in the way we look at the world and the way that the platform may be different and the intent of the platform is different. But I call it the platform from which ideals are put forward. And it's very similar, very, very similar.
That is so true. That's what I do love about the plays, whether they're dramatic or whether they're, very showy. And
sure,
if you walk away, you've really seen it. It's very philosophical and it is very historical. And I mean, Don Quixote is my hero, and
yes,
we just saw
yes.
that. And we have a wonderful little sculpture of him and his little.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's part of my philosophy about,
right.
I look at everything like that, even though some people say, "Are you crazy? That's not the way it is." So you're right so I'm very anxious, of course, to see Buried Child. I want to see what I'm going to get out of that. But I do take away from everything aha moments. And,
yes.
and of course, Bill said to me, "Well, if it's so sad, do you really want to go?" I said, "Of course I want to go. I want to see it. That's what life is."
Exactly. It's a part of how we perceive the world around us. We read, we listen, we talk, we share, and we want those experiences that sometimes will challenge us, even just to look differently or to listen differently. Theater has that power about it, always.
Yeah, and so your actors, that's just in the time we have left. Let's talk about them a little bit. Men, women, how many?
Yes, it's primarily the men's show, but we have... I'm very lucky to have Rob Donahoe, a fellow who has been on our stage now 2 or 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
He was in Exit the King as the doctor, and he was in Pittman Painters as one of the coal miners, and several other projects. He is amazing as the patriarch of the family. And then the wife is Angie Radosh, who many people know of her work through South Florida, not only on our stages, but throughout the entire area. And we're very pleased to have Paul Tay, who is well known in South Florida for being the artistic director of his own theater, the Mad Cat Theater Company, for his first appearance with us here at Palm Beach Dramaworks. So we're thrilled and with an extraordinary company.
And how long do people have to rehearse this?
We have about 3.5 weeks, Anita, from the very start, from the very first day into our very first performance. We have full 3 weeks, and then we have a couple of days, and then we put it in front of an audience. No play has ever been written that is going to stand alone, and it doesn't finish its rehearsal until it's put in front of an audience. That's why it was written that way. We have about 3.5 weeks, and as they would say, there's never enough time.
Right, and when do they wear the costumes? Is that after is it important what their costumes look like when they're rehearsing?
It is, because I am a very strong believer in, as a director, that the way that you feel, the way that you look, what you have on your feet, that which you carry on your back, it's going to be impactful to the way that you move, the way that you tell, the way that you talk. So I don't separate the two. Some people will say, I don't need a costume until the very last moment. And I believe that the costume reveals things to an actor as they work. We usually don't put costumes, the real actual show costumes, Anita, onto the work until what we call our technical weekend. That's where the actors move to the set. That's where we put the lights to it, the sound, and the costumes. And that's when we fine-tune all of that. But in rehearsals, I'm very demanding and ask that my actors wear what we call performance and rehearsal shoes that would match that which they have on stage, or the coats, or the hats. and actually touch and feel those things that are going to define who they are.
And so, have you ever, and of course casting is so important, have you ever cast people who after a couple of rehearsals say, no, it's not right, and you have to get rid of them and get others?
Well, never. I only have had to let someone go once or twice in an entire career of over 200 shows. Casting is a very delicate and very complex perspective, trying to hear people that you know or that you don't know and trying to shape a group together. There have been those moments, I must confess, in which I've cast someone and I've listened to them and 2 or 3 days into it saying, oh no, that is not ideal. But I have not let them go. I find that it's a matter of that we just have to work harder together to try to make it a match, with the material. So it's a fluid and process. You use your judgment, and my judgment has often been called into value. Right? So
that's good. So I like what you said about that. But I guess once you're very experienced and they do some reading and all, you know that those characters in that play so well that you can tell. But I've always wondered if some people have fantastic. Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Some people have fantastic speeches. It means the speaking voices.
Right.
But they don't look like they speak.
Oh, I know. We often say that some people are very good at auditioning for roles, but that when they actually get into rehearsal, they're weak. And then other people, we say, are very poor at auditioning, but are very strong characters. So you have to sort of learn who those individuals are and what their strengths and weaknesses are as well.
Right.
When you live in a place like South Florida, we have an extraordinary allotment of fine actors.
You do.
We get to know them and work with them on multiple occasions. You get to know what their strengths and their weaknesses are.
Well, Barry, you do such a great job, and I just can't wait to see Barry Child. I hope everybody will follow me and go do it. I'm going on the night of the 25th after Cure Symposium during the day, and we're going to see Sam Shepard's Barry Child, Palm Beach Drama Works. Go to the palmbeachdramaworks.org, and then remember, coming up after that, it's going to be Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill, and it's a story of Billie Holiday, but just let's concentrate right now on Barry Child. So thank you so much, Barry. It's always I learned so much from you today.
Oh, thank you, Anita. Always a pleasure.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.